biological pipettes. You open up the one end, so you're never touching the pipette itself. You're slamming it onto the
Hi,
Hey!
my name is Kim. I'm a founder and director of DNA, and we're the community for artists, scientists, and technologists based in Chicago. Can you just introduce yourself?
I'm Andy Scarpelli. I'm the co-founder and president of ChiTownBio, which is a community biolab in Rogers Park. I also am a professor, an associate professor adjunct at the School of the Art Institute, and I teach bioart, biodesign, astrobiology, and a number of science courses.
Can you talk more about ChiTownBio? What is the purpose of ChiTownBio?
Yeah, ChiTownBio serves a couple of different purposes in Chicago. We are a community biolab, which means we are a fully functional molecular biology lab that invites people from Chicago to come in and gain access to a bunch of shared equipment so that they can use it to advance their goals in a supervised and safe environment. And so we have a couple of different things that we really want to do in the space. We want to make sure that we are helping incubate and start off some startups. There are a lot of people who have really great ideas but don't have the space to actually start experimenting with those ideas. What's really nice about us is that we have a lot of bench space that we can rent for relatively cheap, a lot of shared equipment that will hopefully get people to the point where they can go to a more professional incubator and actually get more business training. If you want to do the science part, we are a fully stocked science lab that'll be able to help people get that proof of principle. We also really want to make sure we're doing some job training. So we want to make sure that we are training people who have an interest in biotech but might not have that experience. But we also want to make sure that we're hitting up people who have some training in biotech but might have been out of the lab for a couple years. People who either might have had kids or might have done some jobs as a consultant and then want to go back into the wet lab. So we want to make sure that there is space for people to get trained. We also want to make sure that we are doing outreach to the community in the form of either courses and classes or as in the form of actual citizen science projects. We would love to have people come in, do things that are biological projects that are just of curiosity to them, whether the climate in the region that you're in might affect the growth rates of certain plants, whether you are looking at invasive species as they make their way up the Illinois River or the Chicago River, or if you're looking at the levels of bacteria at your local beach. Things that you're curious about, if you want to start a citizen science project, we will try to do it. And then the last thing that I think is the most relevant to DNA is that we want to make sure that we are creating a space for bioartists and biodesigners to have that shared access to biotech equipment so that they can start their projects and do projects that require an autoclave or pipettes or standard volumes or certain chemicals that they might not be able to ship to their home, and do it in a supervised space, a safe space, so that there is a way for bioartists to have a professional space to work that they'll be able to access with a little bit of training and guidance.
So basically, it's open lab to the public.
Yeah, the whole idea is that we want to make sure that there's a molecular biology lab that everyone has access to. And I think that's really important, especially today when we're seeing society become a little bit suspicious and unfamiliar with science. It's nice to be able to say science is really accessible. It's just that you don't get to see that because usually when you think of a scientist, you think of someone at a research institution that you're never going to be able to get into their lab. This is going to be doing science that we maintain at a very safe level, so it's something that is not going to be of concern when people come in and out, and it's also going to be something that people can experience and partake in. When we say we want to do citizen science projects here in the lab, we want to make sure that people from our neighborhood, from Rogers Park, but from around Chicago can come in and start doing a real science experiment. It's not something that is a high school science project. It's something that could lead to a publication or lead to a startup or just lead to an answer to a question that's really been bothering people about their neighborhood or space.
Thank you. Okay, so the second question is, what do you think artists in science are so eager to collaborate or like so eager to work with together? What do you think about that?
I think it's a really great question. I think it's something we need to encourage more. Just because when we talk about science, science is a pursuit of knowledge. It's almost a philosophical pursuit. It's this idea of we have questions about the world around us and we're trying to figure out what that hidden existential truth is inside of it. science can be translational. It can go into engineering and be used to actually make things. But I think in its purest form, it is an exploration of the world around us to try to get to some fundamental truth. And I think that's part of what good art is, too. It's not always. There are artists who are not worried about a fundamental truth, but are just trying to get people to just think more broadly. But I think that philosophical pursuit is at the heart of both art and science. Beyond that, I think that both scientists and artists are people who look at the world around them and ask, why? I think that's something that is a fundamental part of being an artist. It's a fundamental part of being a scientist. It's you're looking at the world and going, this is the way that something is, but why does it have to be that way? Is there a fundamental law that is dictating that the world works this way? Is there something that is making sure that this operation is always happening at this level? And I think there are two different methods you can get to that. Well, there are more than two, but science and art give you two different tools to allow you to explore that route of figuring out why things are the way that they are. I think what's so strange is there are so many why questions that you can think of that are going to be both the fundamental, I keep using fundamental, but they are going to be the basis for a research paper. They're also going to be a basis for a piece of art. I think what's fascinating is there was an article, I think, in a sociology or a psychology paper a couple years ago about the use of natural themes in art and artists' works based on what that reflects about human psychology. It was a science paper. It's the social sciences, but I would still say it's a science. And I think that that could also be boiled down to Kermit the Frog asking why are there so many songs about rainbows. Like, there's an artistic way of asking it that you can do with puppetry and with filmmaking and with music, or there's something that you can go and say, why are there so many songs about rainbows? Why do artists use natural phenomena so frequently? Is there something psychologically or sociologically that answers that? And there are two ways that you can look about that. There are things that we're going to ask that can be looked at from two different lenses. You're going to get two different answers. If you read that paper, it's not going to be as fun as Kermit the Frog singing on a log pole or a log, but it's going to hopefully kind of create some kind of pathway to a truth that's going to be fundamental.
So, for the question of why, that we're both asking from artists and the scientists, do you have any subject that you're asking about why?
You know, I think for us, because we're not actually doing any specific, we're creating a lab space for people to ask those questions. We really want to make sure that people come in and are curious. And I think that's another thing that is a reason why artists and scientists work really well together. There's a requirement for curiosity in both fields. You need to be curious about things in order to actually look for those truths that are hidden. And so I think we are really asking people to be more curious. We had a day that was really great that we had a representative from Leica, the microscope company, come in and present a bunch of really cool microscopes from Leica that we kind of had an open house and let people come in from the community. And it was fascinating to see what people brought in. And then once you see it, once you have that, vision of a feather that's been blown up 100x, so you can see all of the different barbs and molecular shapes that are part of that. To go like, why is there a barb on this duck feather this way? Well, it's meant to hook around so that the duck, when it's preening itself, can kind of waterproof itself. There are all these different things you can start to ask and then get answers to by just being open to look in the first place. And I think that curiosity is a fundamental component of both science and art. And it's one more reason why artists and scientists have such a natural affinity to each other and would make such great partners in so many different ways.
I think that's so beautiful.
That's what?
That's so beautiful.
I really think lately I've been listening to a lot of philosophical podcasts. I really love philosophy, but I've been really taken by the philosophers who talked about both art and talked about science. There's a long history of epistemology. Epistemology is the philosophy of knowing how we know what we know. And I think art and science are two different forms of epistemology. And I think when we think of epistemology, usually science has such an upper hand in that. How we know what we know, well, there's this method that allowed us to ask a question that gave us this specific answer. And I think with art, it is epistemology, but for more abstract concepts. It is, how do we know the identity of ourselves? Well, that's something that is going to be beyond science. It's something that we can't run an experiment that's going to be falsifiable. What's going to be true to us is going to be true to us in one sense that isn't going to be something covered by science. And that aspect of truth isn't going to be untrue. It's not going to be scientific. But something doesn't have to be scientific to be true. And I think that art allows you to look at all these other things that are going to be true. If I drop a pen, it's going to accelerate towards the ground at 9.81 meters per second squared. That is a truth. But I get really emotional when I see movies or videos online of dogs being reunited with their owners after a long period of time. That's a truth that we could probably start to measure my heart rate, my serotonin levels, different aspects of my biology. We could identify that. But there's also going to be this other truth of just like, I really like when people have a longing for something and it just gets fulfilled. It's wish fulfillment. It's someone who misses someone and gets to visit them. And I think dogs don't have the capability of hiding those emotions. So it's, why do I get excited about those? Well, there is probably a evolutionary history to why evolutionary psychology. There's probably a neurological effect. There's other truths to it too. I really like when people are happy. It's why I don't watch a lot of horror films. I do not like when people get hurt. But there are multiple truths, and I think that these are two different routes to look at it. And I think what's really cool is when you combine art and science, you get these two different lenses to look at something that almost allows you to like move your head back and forth to kind of look at something from two different angles at the same time. You're presented with a piece that allows you to kind of just look at one way and then look the other way and just see something slightly different. Two different angles of a piece of art, or two different angles of a cliffside, or something that just is inspiring. I think it's kind of cool. I think way too much about it.
No. No, I was thinking of that, like, yeah, because I think, like, while you're talking about the emotional part that you get when you see the movie,
yeah.
It feels like to me, like, so sometimes it's going back and forth. Like, we, as an artist, we feel something that is really beautiful when scientists make a visuals of, like, bio art, like, not even, like, they were just doing their experiment, but we feel beautiful. And then also, like, scientists also feel like, oh, emotions, and then they try to, like, research, why do I feel these emotions through this art? And there was, like, it's linked together.
I got to really, a real honor of mine was that I got to participate in an exhibit by Tim Parsons and Jessica Charlesworth when they had, I think around 2018 or 2019, where they had it at the Chicago Cultural Center. They had a bunch of people come in and talk about things that they think are beautiful. And so they brought in an architect, and he talked about all these different buildings around the world that he went to. They brought an artist, and she talked about the things that inspired her. And what's really weird is that I was there and I was like, oh, I feel like I might have gotten this assignment wrong. But I started talking about my favorite experiments. The experiments that are just things that were really well designed, that people were like, all right, how do we know this? And then came up with something that they were able to communicate with the world of going like, we know fundamentally how, so I talked about this one paper by these two really lovely old men who were now old at the time they wrote the paper, but they figured out how DNA gets replicated. There were lots of different ways that they thought that it could completely unwind and get replicated as separate strands. They thought it could be chopped up into little blocks and then like replicated piece by piece. Or they thought it could just be that the structure itself is left solid, but somehow we're able to figure out the code inside and build a new one with it as a template. But the semi-conservative, splitting into two pieces and replicating from it, ended up proving to be the case that it worked. And the way they did the experiment was something that they did something really simple. They fed some bacteria some radioactive material that would be incorporated into the DNA, and then they watched how the radioactive DNA kind of split off to see if it's all staying in this heavy form or in this light form with this new, it's not really radioactive, it's just a heavy form of nitrogen, but it's not as stable as. What they did is they took this heavy molecule, our heavy atom, added it into the growth media for the DNA, just split into, just looked at if the DNA stayed heavy, if it got light, where it was actually the new DNA versus the old DNA was going. And they have this really beautiful image where they just show over time that it never gets to the point where anything's completely new. It's always going to be this, that's not quite right either. There'll be new strands over time because it'll be, each time it splits, the old strand will make a new strand with it. And so some of these will be just new and new, but there'll always be this old strand that sticks around. It'll always be part of this process because it's always semi-conservative. There's this process to it. And so it's the Messelson and Stahl paper. It's a great paper. But I brought up this picture, and I feel like I could watch the audience for this artist talk just kind of go like, why is he talking about this science paper? But there's really a beauty in someone going like, here's a simple way to answer a question. If anyone doesn't believe us, this method is so simple that if you have access to nitrogen-15, a heavy isotope of nitrogen, which not everyone has, you should be able to do this on your own. But other scientists that didn't believe them could do it. And it's just such an easy way to go like, we're doing good science because it's something that we took a simple question, we answered it in a way that provides a huge amount of evidence, and it's anyone could do it. There's just something really beautiful about enlightenment. And there are a couple other things I talked about that I thought were really beautiful, but I could tell I lost the crowd at that. But it's that what we find beautiful. I think the other thing about that too is when you talk about like when scientists make these models or representations of the structure of our DNA or something like that, if we think of them as beautiful, that's not actually how our DNA works. Like those models you see are densities of atoms that are held together in certain conformations, but we're trying to figure out a way to express that to each other. So when we draw a double helix, it's the best representation that we can have of it, but the width of those bonds is going to be smaller than the wavelength of light that we're actually going to be able to see. So if you're coloring that in, what are you coloring in? That color is already hinting at something that can't be part of this. So there's tons of symbolism in science that we use even if we don't pretend like we're using it, especially when we get to either the very small scale or the very big scale. So when we get to astrophysics or when we get down to molecular biology.
What do you think it's so important to see those collaborations between artists and science? Like why do we need those collaborations?
Why do we need art and science to be seen? I think we need both of them to be seen separately, you know? I think we need to have more art and we need to have more science. People need to recognize all the parts of their lives that are being shaped by fundamental science. We're talking on a recording right now that the entire building of a camera is going to be based on all of these different principles that we've figured out through long periods of experimentation, and then the engineering and design. But once you switch from engineering to design, design is going to start to take into account aesthetics and emotions and the feelings of things. So there's a long history of art in everything around us. Why is a stop sign red? Well, there's an emotion associated with it. There's something that we know about that color theory that is going to be something that was elucidated through art. There's going to be, why are we more likely to feel something if a sign is fluorescent? If you go to a store and you see something that's really bright, it might have some chemicals that were developed in chemistry to actually make it pop a little more. But it's going to be something that's based on how we understand art, how we understand how people interact with the world around them, and the emotions that are impacted by that. Maybe a little more design at that point, but I think that is a continuum that is pretty dicing up where something is in the world of science, engineering, design, art. It gets a little bit messy. I think what's really great about seeing science and art together is that you do get that thing I was talking earlier about that two perspectives at one. You kind of can start just getting a little bit more 3D modeling of the space around you. Two different ways of looking at the same concept. But I think another thing that's just really fundamentally true that kind of can help with seeing art and science together is that they're not at odds. I think so many people think that science is such a rigid and specific way of looking at the world that It's not going to allow for any subjectivity. And art is so subjective that there's no objectivity. And I think that that space of science and art together allows you to see that science isn't as objective as we want it to be. There's always going to be that human interpretation of data. Even if you get the purest data set, we're still going to have to put it through the lens of human experience. And art is not also as subjective as we want it to be either. There are going to be some things that are going to be universally disgusting or universally heartwarming. If there is someone who can watch one of those videos of puppies getting reunited with their owners and doesn't feel happy, they're a monster. They're an absolute monster. But I think it goes back to that idea that there are some things that are just universal truths that are going to be part of science or art, and there are going to be some mysteries. There are going to be some ways that we're going to run into limitations of how we can communicate science. And so having those together allows us to look at the objectivity of art and the subjectivity of science in a way that is going to be meaningful in the way that we interpret everything around us moving forward.
Beautiful. What inspires you lately?
What inspires me lately? That's a great question, because I think, one of the things that's fundamental to both art and science is it's that exposure of the truth. And I think right now we are living in some precarious and dark times where there are lots of people who want to tell us things that aren't true, but they are presenting them as if they are. And I feel like what's been inspiring me is people who stand up and go like, actually, this is the way things are, and we can do that fundamental science or that fundamental emotional gut check to go like, this is a truth, and expose that. And so it can be comedians making fun of the politics of the world, or it can be scientists standing up for each other and protesting science cuts, but it's people standing up for going, no, there are ways that we can look at the truth. There are ways that we can do this through humor, or we can do it through art, or we can do it through science, but just stand up for something that's fundamental. I keep using the word fundamental. Something that is universal, something that is true. I think that is, I'm looking at so many people right now in the world of biotech who are really hurting because of all the different government cuts and the different companies that are shut down. And one of the things that's really driving the space is just going, how do we create a space for those people so that when there is downtime, they will have somewhere to go, that they can work, that they can get things done, that they can, if they're an artist, that they can have this shared resources, something that can make sure that we continue to move forward for human progress, that we can work together on that. I think that's something that's a driving force in my life, is just how we can better serve each other to build a community that is resilient and can do things together that are great things, that we can sequence the human genome, or that we can, build the Taj Mahal. Like, when people come together, you can build massive, amazing things, or get to fundamental truths that are just going to allow us to learn so much about ourselves.
Save ourselves.
Yeah, save ourselves in a way, but I think also just, there's this, in ancient Greece, they thought of themselves as living in the Bronze Age, that during the time of early existence, things were great, and then when the Titans came around, it was a Silver Age, and it was a better time, and that world was constantly decaying. There are lots of different cultures that think of the world as going through cycles of growth and destruction. And I think one of the things that's really fascinating about videos and films and movies from the 1950s, 60s, is that there's this faith in human progress, that they're just like, humans are going to keep getting better and better and better. We're going to have colonies on Mars, and we're going to live there, and we're going to have pills that are our dinner, but we're going to still feel like it was delicious. And these things that humans started to go like, we're not limited by like this cycle of our own violence and destruction. And so I think that we've lost that in the last 30, 40 years because of climate change, because of political instability, because of narcissists taking over the government in different forms, not just the current one, but just different people kind of reflecting on things negatively. We've kind of lost that faith that things are going to continue to get better. I think if you poll Gen Z and Gen Alpha, there's this fear of climate change saying that the world is going to be harder for us than it was for our parents. And I think we have to figure out a way to turn that around, to start building resources for each other, to inspire each other through art and through science, to go like, no, we can get back to that point where we have faith that things will get better for us, that we are going to be able to help each other, that we are going to be better off in 200 years than we were 200 years ago. Like, we still didn't know what cholera was, and drinking water could be something that could kill you. Like, it is to save ourselves to an extent, but it's also just to make life easier for the people who come after us each generation. We just need to get back on that track.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this will be the last question.
Okay.
How do you think Chicago as a scientist?
How do I think of Chicago as a scientist? Chicago is a city built on science. We turned a river around. The Chicago River flows the opposite direction it did. I think what's so fascinating is that there's this really great database online that's called the BRIT, and it is an ethnobotany catalog of every Native American tribe in North America, that how they use different plants and fungi and animals and how they use them for different purposes. So whether they use them as a textile or a medicine or a food. And so Chicago has a history going back millennia of people coming up with ways to interact with and use the natural world in order to improve their lives. And then we have so many things that we've continued to build in Chicago that have done that. We've invented, we turned around the river. We invented, I believe the first elevator was built in Chicago. Skyscrapers were built in Chicago. Birth control was pretty much one of the first early pill forms was discovered here in Chicago. We invented the Ferris wheel, which isn't really saving anyone's life, but I mean, it's cool. Like, science has led us to many. We split the atom for the first time in Chicago. Enrico Fermi split the atom for the first time at the University of Chicago. We are a city of science. We have done so many cool things, and it's something we forget sometimes, but this city is always discovering new things, is building new things, is working on new things. So Chicago as a scientist is exciting. I don't know how to answer that, just because I don't want to go I don't want to go too Bill Nye, but it's just that everything is science. I love that the autoclave was like, you're talking too much. It's literally shooting hot air out. So it's saying, this is some bullshit. But it's true. I mean, Chicago is science, science is Chicago.
Do you still believe that? Do you still believe Chicago is the city of science?
I don't think Chicago is the city of science, just because I really think of science as something that it belongs to everyone. It's a philosophy. It's the same thing as wars have been fought over who owns a certain philosophy or a way of thinking. No one owns science. Everyone owns science. Like, everyone who has, said, I think it's going to take me 10 minutes to get to the grocery store, gone there, figured it took them 15 minutes, and then the next time they went, I think it's going to take me 15 minutes. Like, when they have that hypothesis, the constant revision of their lives, they're doing science. So Chicago's not the city of science, it's a city of science. It's a city that wouldn't be here if science didn't exist. It's something that our existence is owed to science to an extent, but we don't own it. That feels weird.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone owns science. That's just the end of the story. And so, I'm happy to be in a city of science.
A city of science.
Yeah.
And we're a community for scientists.
Yeah, but we're a community for people who are not scientists in the traditional sense to do science too. It's one of the reasons that I think it goes back to our conversations of bioart. It's that artists are scientists, business people are scientists, lawyers are scientists. I think what's fun is the number of people who've come into the lab and gone like, oh, I think I could do something like this. I wish more of them would come and stay and do things, but everyone can be scientists. It's not, everyone is scientists. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Hopefully you can make something out of that, because that was a lot of word salad too.
Thank you so much. Woo-hoo.
That's okay.